Here's how motorcyclists and drivers can work together to keep everyone safe on and around our roadways. Motorcyclists, wear protective gear during every ride. This includes an approved helmet, eye protection, jacket, gloves, and boots. Make sure your tires are inflated to the right pressure. Poor pressure may make your bike more difficult to maneuver. Use both brakes. Although front brakes alone may seem to be enough most of the time, the best way to achieve maximum braking is to apply both brakes fully without locking either wheel. Look where you're going. Use strategic lane positioning to help you see and avoid roadway hazards and to maintain a safe distance from other traffic. Use your lights at all times of the day and switch to high beams through intersections to let other drivers know you're there. Drivers, start seeing motorcycles. Train your brain to look for them every time you get behind the wheel. When you spot a motorcycle, imagine the person wearing the helmet is someone you know and care about. Drive distraction-free for your own safety and for the safety of everyone else on the road. Take an extra moment to look for motorcycles when turning left or pulling in and out of driveways and parking lots. Give more following distance when behind a motorcycle, as they may downshift instead of braking to slow down. This means their brake light may not alert you to their deceleration when you might expect it. When motorcyclists and drivers work together to follow these tips, we can reach zero fatalities on our roadways.
Council meeting. To help reduce the transmission of COVID-19, we have returned to holding our meetings virtually. This return to online meetings follows an increase in COVID-19 cases and updated mask requirements. We are closely monitoring the situation, and the council will return with hybrid or in-person meetings when appropriate and safer for the public and city employees. As many of you know, there is no public comment during this work session. However, please join us remotely tonight at 7 p.m. for the formal meeting to share any comments. Your feedback is always welcome, and you can share with the City Council anytime by mailing us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or by calling our 24-hour phone comment line at 801-535-7654. We're going to move right into our work session, beginning with item number 1, which is informational updates from the administration. I think we've got the mayor here, Rachel Otto.
Chair.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor Mendenhall, for being here. And I believe that Rachel Otto, your chief of staff, as well as Lisa Schaefer, the CAO of the city, is here to help as well. And also available for questions is Jennifer Schumann, the Ken Deputy Director, and Michelle Hoon, who's over Homeless Service Project Manager. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We'll start with our COVID data updates. If the staff could help bring that slide deck up. Thank you so much, Taylor. We'll go right into the next slide. These are the standard updates we bring you. Of course, we're still growing, still in the high transmission level throughout Salt Lake County and every other county in the state of Utah. We're averaging 427 cases per 100,000 people, which is up from about 399 last week. We have 1,326 cases statewide, which is up again from the week prior. And the 7-day average is down about 150, 160 cases. Our ICUs are at 92% capacity, and 44% of that 44% of the ICU utilization is COVID related. We can go on to the next slide. Next slide. Thanks. These are the countywide demographics on full vaccination rates. You know, as a state, we're just about 50% fully vaccinated. So when you look at these countywide numbers, Salt Lake County is by and large doing better than the statewide average. We can go on to our next slide. There is a vaccination clinic just tomorrow. We talked about this last week. And there are coats and shoes available for kids while supplies last. We do this every year, and it's open from 4 to 7 p.m. at Rose Park Elementary School. Anybody 12 and older can get their free vaccination that day. Pick up coats and shoes for any of the kids and just walk up, no appointment necessary. Thanks to our partners at the county. Next slide. And this will take us into our homelessness update. I'm not sure if Andrew or Michelle is doing that. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mayor. I'm on the line. As you can see, the current numbers there, we talk about each week with the Resource Center census. Pretty steady of what we've seen recently. You'll see the average is 90%, which is up from last week. Next slide. We had the same slide last week, but these are happening this week. So we have the resource fair at Madsen Park off of North Temple on the 23rd, and then Kayak Court on the 27th. I still don't have a location, but it will be on the Jordan River. And then what's new again is this Friday is the Salt Lake City Justice Courts have opened their dockets Friday morning. Their judges will see high utilizer cases, which really overlaps with a lot of folks in the resource centers and who are unsheltered, who have more than 5 charges. And it's very helpful again to ensure there's consistency to know how to access the court system to handle these issues. Helps the court process things more quickly and efficiently. So really excited to see how this goes. They're going to try and do it at least once a month for a while and see how much of an impact they can make in a positive way. I don't know there's another slide, but I do have one more update. We'll just double check the slides again.
And then Taylor, if you wouldn't mind going back to the kids slide, I think we missed that in regards to COVID after Andrew is done.
We had a request from council members about some outcome measures for the resource centers. I think it was success measures people wanted to see. And I didn't get a chance to get them into the slide deck, but we can do that in the next update. I'll give them to you verbally right now and explain them a little bit. This is out of the statewide homelessness update that's published every year, and it's online for anybody who wants to see it. In Salt Lake County, we had just under 7,000 people experiencing homelessness in the resource centers last year. And that means there's duplicates there. Well, there's no duplicates. There are people who came in and out multiple times. But if you can get a sense of, we've got about 1,000 beds in the resource centers, and we saw about 7 times that many people come through those beds. It'll give you a bit of a sense of the scale we're looking at and the scope of what we're talking about. We talk about folks who are unstably housed or unhoused. There's a question about in the resource centers, when people leave to housing, a successful outcome, what does that look like? How many people? And then from the state level, also, we were very interested in seeing how many people come back into the resource center system or the shelter system within 6 months, a year, or 2 years. That shows the effectiveness of a housing placement, right? If somebody leaves to a permanent housing and doesn't come back in 2 years, we assume they're pretty stable, which is statistically speaking very reliable. If they come back within a shorter time frame, something's gone wrong in that process. Funding wise, the apartment itself, or something happened, right? So in the emergency shelters in 2020, we go back 2 years. So in the last 2 years, really since we opened up, we've had about 1,000 people out of those resource centers leave directly into permanent housing. Within about 6 months in the last 2 years, about 1/4 of them returned back into the system, into the resource centers in some capacity. And then within a year, another about 6%, and within 2 years, about 10%. So overall, in 2 years, about 40% of the folks came back into the resource centers at some point. The majority of those obviously come back very quickly within 6 months, and far fewer come back later on in that process. We also know that we've housed far fewer people this year than traditionally. It's gone down. Also, length of stay in those resource centers tells us how quickly people are moving out into housing, and talks a little bit about the housing options available. The longer somebody's in a resource center looking for housing, the more we know it's hard to find housing out there. So this year we averaged 77 days in shelter for folks overall. Last year was 60 days. We know there's been a big increase in the number of folks looking for shelter and needs, and also a delay in the number of folks who can leave into housing. There's a variety of reasons, but the availability of housing at that income level is a major issue in this discussion. And so we can talk more about that as we go forward, but that might give you a primer into more outcome measures that we can share more frequently with you about the resource centers and the system. Are there any questions about those right now, or things? What else you'd like to maybe see us present to you?
I don't see any questions from council members, Andrew. I appreciate you being here and always being willing to talk about the issues that we have with Salt Lake City and our homeless individuals. But let's thank you, Taylor. You just went straight to it. Mayor, I know you wanted to jump back to this.
Yeah, thanks. Just the additional slide that we are going to continue to bring to you with updates. 294 kids, school-age kids have COVID right now. That's 22% of all the cases in the state. And that's about 1,200 kids age 5 to 11. So I'm not actually the 294 school-age child cases. Somebody might need to let me know exactly what that number is, because I know that the 1,207 is for age 5 to 11. And compared to this time last year, it was only at 117. So Rachel or somebody, do you know what the 294 school-age child cases are compared to the 1,200?
That is a good question. It may be new cases. Let me check back on that and make sure we're clear next week.
Okay, sorry about that confusion. We'll get more clear on this slide. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's all for me. I think we have an update from Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. It's good to be with you again. Taylor, if you could start our slide deck, please. Next slide, please. Council, this week we'd like to talk a little bit about park safety in Salt Lake City. But to start out, I don't think people realize that there are approximately 100 parks of various sizes within the city limits. They know of the big parks, Sugar House, Liberty, Pioneer, Jordan, but there are pocket parks totaling almost 100 within our city. Those parks account for approximately 735 acres of land, which is an enormous amount of land to to patrol. To give you a reference, 640 acres is a square mile, and we exceed that here in Salt Lake City. Our park bike squad was formed in 2019 when we had a lot of discussion with the council about how we could better serve our parks here in Salt Lake City. At the time, we were trying to use overtime to meet those needs, and it really wasn't meeting the needs of our communities and the parks to keep them safe. So we thought the best thing to do was to build a park bike squad, and that came to fruition in 2019. That squad is consistent of 1 sergeant and 5 officers. And you need to remember, they only are able to work 4 days a week because we do give them a few days off, but we try to focus their efforts on the weekends. Next slide. This squad is committed to proactive community-based policing. They do a fantastic job working within the parks across the city. And council members, as you're hearing from your constituents, our parks are faced with a wide range of issues, including drug use. That's both use, selling, distribution, illegal camping, and rare occurrences of violence. I want you to know that keeping the parks clear of criminal activity and illegal camps from taking over requires it's a constant presence of not only the officers that work in the park squad, but they're also augmented with the other park squad or bike squads around the city, the Pioneer Bike Squad, the Central Bike Squad, and the Liberty Bike Squad. So they all work hand in glove to try to put an emphasis in the parks. Next slide. They're busy. They're busy. They try to spend a lot of time at all the different parks because it's really not fair just to put them into certain parks. I think every park across our city needs the presence, the visibility of having officers available. So here's a snapshot on August 26th of the parks that they patrolled. That include Popperton, Fairmont, Liberty, Sugar House, Wasatch Hollow Natural Area, Sunnyside Park, Salt Lake Cemetery, Lindsay Gardens, 11th Avenue, Pioneer, and Warm Springs. So they try to get around to the different parks and spend some time and spread their community policing across the city. Next slide. Here's the reality though. The park squad is faced with the same reality and the same problem that we're in, and the same challenge that we're having across the city, and this affects most of our specialty units. This affects all the bike squads, the 4 bike squads, our gang units, our motors. We are handling more and more calls for service. If you look on that right side, you'll see that the 5-year average for week 37, and that's the week of September 13th through the 19th, the 5-year average is 2,180 calls for service. Calls for service this year in 2021 are up 29%. That's 2,822. So this year, this week, based on what the data shows, they've handled over 642 more calls for service across the city. And if you look right below that, you can see that one of the biggest calls that they're responding to are transient related calls. You can see last year in 2020, we responded in this week to 76 calls. This year, 155. 79 more calls for service across the city, which is a 104 increase.
Chief, are those specific to parks? These numbers are specific to parks?
No, Councilmember Mono, no, those are citywide.
Okay.
But it should be noted that a lot of the calls do originate from the various parks. Any questions on that slide before we move on? Okay, next slide. September 12th. I think we all know about the situation that occurred in Liberty Park. At about just before 3 o'clock, we had a shooting in Liberty Park on the east side. A suspect pulled out a handgun and started firing rounds. If it hadn't have been for the community members that were there calling 911 and giving us great information on the suspect, well, because they did that, we were able to apprehend that suspect as he was leaving the park. He had made it across to the northwest corner of the park when officers apprehended him. We were able to go back and find a shell casing. We were able to take a gun off this individual. And please know, this person was on probation for felonies. He was charged and arrested for discharging a firearm and being a restricted person in possession of a firearm. But I can't emphasize enough how important and what a great partner the communities that visit these parks are. By them being aware of the situation and giving us that immediate information, we were able to apprehend that individual before he could even leave the park. Next slide, please. Now, this is an ongoing street crimes investigation. And I will point out that it is occurring in 2 downtown parks. But because it's ongoing, we've pixelated the amount of drugs that you see there. But let me tell you, that is a lot of drugs that if had not our officers intercepted it, it would be destined for the streets and the communities of Salt Lake City. This was a collaborative effort between your Pioneer, your Central, and your Park Bike Squad, along with the Special Investigation Squads. They conducted several narcotic operations, like I said, in 2 of the downtown parks. Multiple people were arrested for felonies. That picture is 793 grams of meth, 501 grams of heroin, 29 grams of spice, 150 oxycodone pills, and $5,319 in cash were seized. Like I said, I can't be too specific because this, as with many of these investigations, they spider out and they continue to grow. But I want you to know that the officers on those bike squads and those specialty units are doing a fantastic job in taking down those that would sell drugs in our parks.
Chief?
Yeah.
I have a question. So when the police officers are able to obtain this from the activity, what triggers it? Is it a phone call that somebody said, "Hey, we feel like there's a drug deal going on," and the officers arrived at the right time and they were able to size this, or how do you guys find that, right? Like, what's my question is, like, how were you guys able to find this?
It's a secret. We can't tell you. No, Councilmember Valdemoros, you know what? I keep saying this, our biggest and best partner is the community. Most of the crimes that we solve are because the community steps up and says something. If they see something, I can't reiterate more how important it is to say something, because from these small tips, small things that they see, they're paying huge dividends because we follow up on those. And many of these lead to these type of investigations and these type of seizures, and more importantly, these type of arrests.
Okay.
So, good question, though. Thank you.
I'm excited that you guys are able to take this off of the street. So thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. And I think it was just yesterday, on Monday, I know Mayor Mendenhall and myself stood in, and several council members stood with us in Pioneer Park a few weeks ago when we talked about expanding our focus areas in the downtown area to include, well, it's always included Toffer Park, but also to include Pioneer Park. But the officers that were working these focus areas just yesterday went to stop a suspicious vehicle. The driver of that vehicle decided not to stop and fled. The suspect driver crashed into 3 vehicles. They were ultimately caught and taken into custody, and they were booked for several felony and misdemeanor warrants. So because we had officers in these areas using overtime, not tied to the radio and calls for service, they were able to identify that type of vehicle, that suspicious activity, and then make an arrest. So I just want to point out that these focus area patrols are really a windfall for the areas downtown, and not only keeping the camps from reestablishing, but also proactive police work that is catching individuals like this.
Chief?
Yeah.
Are those focus areas only Toffer Park and Pioneer Park, or do those extend to other parks that are seeing increased encampments and drug use?
It's from Romano right now, and it's kind of based with the discussions with Andrew Johnston in the CCP program, but the priority has been the area 7th South, and then it radiates from there out, and then the Rio Grande area down on 2nd South, and it radiates out from there. So those are the areas, but also it goes out as some of those encampments we know they move, and also the crime with it moves as well. But if we find different things that are occurring in other parks, we can definitely direct our resources to those parks as well.
Okay, I mean, I think you're aware, but I'm getting a ton of emails, I'm sure you are as well, about Liberty Park and Jefferson Park specifically, but others throughout District 5, where I think maybe the work that you're doing in Pioneer Park and Toffer Park is quite successful, but we're seeing the spillover into District 5. So
yeah,
anything we can do to expand that to more hotspots throughout the city would be great.
Absolutely, Councilmember Ma.
We
will, and one of the biggest the quarterback, so to speak, for the different districts is the DCLO program, the District Community Liaison Officer Program. You have Officer Ellen Oliver, and then you have Officer Bob Norgard, and you have Detective Nate Meinzer. They're kind of the quarterbacks, and so that's why it's so important that if people are seeing crime or suspicious activity, to please call, because these officers can help coordinate the resources, the bike squads, the street investigations, the undercover narcotic operations, that we can move in and do the type of work that we've been doing in these downtown parks. Any questions from there? Next slide. And then I just wanted to give you a quick staffing update. The authorized staffing for the Salt Lake City Police Department is 569. We have now 51 vacancies, and our staffing is 518. The high water mark a few months ago exceeded 70 officers. So we're really moving in the right direction, Council, and I want you to know that. And a big thanks goes to you and Mayor Mendenhall for the work that you put into getting us the raises and the salary adjustments that were well needed. Next slide. We're really on a good trajectory as far as our hiring. I wanted to kind of lay out where we're at and how we're moving along. You can see that recruit class 153, there's 19 officers. They're now an FTO, And we plan to have those 19 officers out in our communities answering calls for service. Recruit class 154, there are 21 officers in that class. They started in August. I think we talked about that. But they're slated to hit the streets and start taking calls for service in June of 2022. We have a Lateral Academy that's starting October 11th. Now, laterals are already police officers, so they don't need that extensive training that we put them through in an academy. So after doing a 2-week in-house academy, they will be taking calls for service in our community the 1st of November of this year. And then as we go forward from there, we hope to hire another lateral class in either late December of 2021 or 1st of the year 2022. And we hope to have 20 lateral officers. And again, lateral officers after 2 weeks of an in-house academy can be out on the street taking calls for service, hopefully by mid-January or the 1st of February of next year. And then we have another class 155, that will be starting to do backgrounds in the hiring process. That class is slated to be 30 officers, and it'll start January of 2022. The next class of new hires will be recruit class 156. We hope to start that class in May of 2022. And again, that'll be 30 officers. So we really are on a good trajectory as far as getting officers back into our academies and then ultimately to the streets. And then as of right now, I think we have 9 rehires that have come back to the department. And I anticipate more there. So again, thank you very much. And any questions?
Chief, if I may, how did those numbers on that last slide there, are those reflected at all in the 51 current vacancies?
The ones that are actually hired, Councilmember Ferris, the recruit class 153, that 19, that 21, those are accounted for in the FTEs. Those aren't the vacancies because they're actually hired.
Okay, and so the lateral class and beyond are not yet counted.
Right.
Thank you.
Clarify that. Thanks, Councilmember Ferris. To clarify that, there are 51 vacancies, but there's actually closer to 90, 97 officers that are not on the streets currently working. So we're understaffed by 97 still. Am I understanding that correctly? With officers that can actually respond to calls?
Yeah, the 51 vacancies, they're not here to take calls. And then there are 41 officers that are in the academy. So yeah, but we have to start somewhere and we're moving right along. So we're going as fast as we can.
Thank you, Councilmember Mono. That was actually going to be my question in regards to the vacancy savings or the unfilled positions. So I wanted to get that clarified so everybody could understand that we still are understaffed. And Chief, I want to thank you for your hard work in this and bringing, I know that you have done personal endeavors and to bring back some of those officers that actually had left. So I personally want to thank you for extending those phone calls and making that happen for Salt Lake City.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Appreciate that.
I don't think there's anything else unless anyone wants to pipe in and add to item number 1, informational update.
I have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Great. Let's hear it, Councilmember Mono.
Chief or Mayor, whoever, is there anything that the council can do to support creating better, making our parks more safe? It's something I can't emphasize how much I've been hearing about this. And if there's anything that that any support you need from us or any policy discussions we need to be having, could you just let us know so that we are doing everything to make your job successful?
Well, Councilmember Mono, thank you. I know that's the goal. Everybody's goal is to have our parks as safe as possible. I think that the most important thing is to be tell your constituents to be the very best partner they can for us, because through their eyes and ears, they really help us identify problems. Illegal camps. I know last Friday that we did some camp relocations out of Liberty Park. And so as people visit the parks, if they'll use the Salt Lake City mobile app or go online to report those, that's really helpful. But continue to bring the problems and concerns, because we don't know what we don't know. And so if they can bring those to us or to you and you can forward those to us, it'll help us direct our resources, because I think we're all working for the same goal.
I'd like to add, if I could, that the awesome work of the bike patrol, that came back from the city council years ago, funding bike patrol to come back. I'm a fan of bike patrol, and I'm also a fan of other park ranger programmatic concepts. And so I think we should reinitiate these discussions with our public lands folks as well, in conjunction with our police department. And while we continue to build this department's staffing levels back up, talking about the opportunity to increase laterals, which is our fastest way to get trained officers on the street. Also talking about ways to grow and amplify the awesome work of Bike Patrol, Park Ranger program, and then in new iterations, complementary iterations, in addition to that, of other Park Ranger ideas.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
So that's thank you, Mayor. I think, yeah, we talked about that. I remember way back when I started being at the council. So that's something I would like to revive. The ranger. I also love the patrols, the bike patrols. But maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, I did ask the council, or I did throw the idea, or I mentioned, whatever it is, what else can we do to help our police department while they get this 51 vacancies filled up? Obviously, it takes some time, but there are pressing issues with crime in our parks. And I did say, council, maybe should we think about outsourcing public safety? Do we need to fund the outsource and then hire or partner up with Unified Police or Highway Patrols to help us until we're able to fill up our own staffing and then provide the level of service that we need to provide? So I'm throwing it out there again, just following up on Darren's comment about what else can we do to help. If the trend continues as is, I feel like we might not need to do that until we are able to hire more people. The calls continue happening. Crime is still out there happening. So I would be in favor of looking at some funding to outsource temporarily so that our residents can feel safe in the parks of Salt Lake City. Those are just my comments.
Councilmember Valdemoros, if I could just comment though, the very same thing that we're experiencing here with low staffing. The majority of the agencies, when you mention UHP and Unified and a lot of the agencies across the valley, are experiencing the same thing. So I'm open to any suggestions, but I think you have the best police department in the state, if not the country, serving this city right now. So we appreciate. We'll look at everything we can and then some to see what we can do to make these parks safe, because I know they're very important to our communities.
Okay, any other questions for the chief while we have him here? If not, we're going to move on to item number 2, updates on racial equity and policing. I know that we have Allison Rowland, who is Council Office Policy Analyst, as well as Coletta Lynch from the Mayor's Office here to discuss and update us. So Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just briefly remind you that tonight during the formal meeting, you'll have the opportunity to vote to confirm the members of phase 2 of the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. So that is on your lineup for tonight. And once that's done, they'll be able to meet again and continue their work. Besides that, I will just turn everything over to Coletta. She also has a guest today, Annette, whose last name's escaping me, Keene. There we go, sorry. So Annette Keene is also here, and Coletta will explain her role in the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, City Council members, for allowing me time today to update you on a few items. I just really quickly wanted to let you know that we are looking to hire a new ADA coordinator. The posting will be available on the HR website within the next 2 weeks. So we ask that those who are interested, please apply on our Human Resources website. Also, just a quick update for racial equity and policing. Thank you, Allison, for giving that update, and thank you to city council members and the mayor for your consideration of the returning REP commissioners. Each of those who will return are residents. They're either residents or they have close ties to Salt Lake City. And by close ties, that means that they're either business owners, they're either students, or they're local community leaders here in the Salt Lake City community. I personally want to thank those commissioners who served on the commission last year, but cannot return due to other time commitments. And if advice and consent goes forward this evening, the REP Commission would like to meet for phase 2 on September the 29th. I also wanted to let you know, City Council members, that I have been meeting with SLCPD often to thoroughly review the recommendations from phase 1. SLCPD, thank you to Chief Brown and the deputy chiefs. They're working on a comprehensive report that will be a response back to the mayor, you city council members, and also the REP commissioners. And we will expect to transmit that report very soon. So I'll keep you updated on the timeline for that report. And then finally, the equity plan. So Keene Independent Research Team is currently doing a disparity study, and they're engaging with internal and external stakeholders in our collaboration or in our collaborative efforts to develop a citywide equity plan. As part of this process, they plan to host internal and external stakeholder focus groups and virtual workshops to get feedback from the public. I invited Annette Keene here today to speak to you all and give you a brief update on the plan to engage with community members. So if it's okay, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Annette to give you a brief update.
Thanks, Coletta. I really appreciate you being here to do that. So Annette, we'd love to hear from you.
Principal with Keene Independent, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you, council members, and Coletta and Allison and Mayor. We'll give you a little bit of an update. Are you not hearing me?
It's a little bit quiet. Now you're muted.
Is that better?
That's perfect.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate being here today. Again, thank you to the council members, to Allison and Coletta, and to the mayor. We would like to give an update on just what we're doing for the Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Plan. So far to date, we have done some background research on a number of different topics, from homelessness to economic development, to childcare, affordable housing, and others. And we are sharing those, Coletta is actually sharing those with different departments so they can give us feedback on the memos that we have written. And so that will actually contribute to the ultimate EIB plan. We're also in the process of working with Coletta on developing internal and external stakeholder groups so that we can get both internal and external input and have regular input from these groups. We have drafted a virtual workshop instrument, which we'll be sharing with about 200 or so community members, community stakeholders that have been identified by Coletta's department, as well as augmented, the list will be augmented by the information that we collect. And then we are collecting input from the departments, not only on the individual issues that we have written memos on, but also Coletta has been, we drafted for Coletta a matrix that will give her a tool to work with the departments on what programs they already have in place in terms of equity, and then where there might be some gaps, how they're going to measure success. And then we will be following through with each one of those departments as well once we have gather that information. And we're working with, today we met with economic development. So that was a good conversation that we had on just the process of how we're going to move forward with incorporating different departments and how their equity plans are going to be, what we're hoping for is to help develop some consistency across departments so that everybody's in the same place by the end of the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. We really appreciate you being here. Any questions for Annette? Okay. We're going to move on to item number 3, which is looking at an ordinance for a street vacation near 538 East 14th Avenue. We have at the table Brian Fulmer, who is our council office policy analyst, as well as Wayne Mills, who's the planning manager. Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a proposal to close and vacate a portion of the H Street side of this corner property. The applicants had a permit from the city for use of the area and had a fence on there. When they went to renew the permit after it expired, there was then a cost from the city for exclusive use of the property, and that change was made so the city statute aligns with state statute. Rather than enter into a lease agreement, the applicants are requesting the city vacate the right-of-way and sell it to them at market value. The Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation to the council for this request, and I believe the applicant is on the call and available for questions. I will turn it over to Wayne.
I think that's actually a pretty good summary. This was heard by the city council a while back, and I think there was a question as to the city council, or I'm sorry, the planning commission made a kind of an interesting recommendation, and it was basically just to ask the city council to consider, let me back up a little bit. The original proposal was for a bit of a larger area, and then when it was routed to the various departments and divisions, engineering came back and said it'd be nice if we could keep at least 6 feet from back of curb, so in case we want to put in a future sidewalk. The applicants responded to that and shifted their request and shrunk it down so that extra 6 feet would be included in the right of way, but it is still currently fenced off, so that would require the applicants to move that fence back. Planning Commission looked at that and was just wondering, I think it was kind of an interesting recommendation. It basically said just to ask the city council to just consider vacating the entire area and then having the city hold an easement over that 6 feet of space. That wasn't part of the original recommendation by planning staff. But there is definitely some issues with that, and I think Brian had touched on that in his report about from the attorney's office that could be problematic. So the Planning Commission's recommendation is to basically, vacate that entire portion.
Okay, so before we go to the applicant for questions, let's see if there are any council members. Councilmember Dugan.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. So that side of the street, I'm looking at the map, the east side of the street has a sidewalk. The west side of the street, this is at the top of that short section of the street. Is there already a public right-of-way on that west side? Or do all the property owners own the land all the way out to the curb? The other 3 remaining houses on that section?
No, they own, from what I remember, let me pull up a map here. They, it's kind of a similar situation as you go down the street. The property owners own, kind of set back away from the curb line. From what I remember, apologize, I'm pulling this up. I wasn't prepared for that question. But from what I remember, as you move further south, the right-of-way gets kind of funky. It kind of moves around a little bit. But
there's on that curve from 13th Avenue to 14th, there's 4 houses. The one house is the one that we're talking about right now, 538. But the 3 houses to the south of it, is there any right-of-ways on that one? I mean, if there's no right-of-ways on that one, then I'm not, why would we not approve this one? Question.
I'm not sure what is meant by right-of-ways on that one. The ownership line is clean all the way down that side of the street. So all the property lines are fairly set back away from the edge of the street itself. This is the one property that's actually fenced the property off, but there are other improvements up and down that area. There's landscaping improvements, and it kind of does look like it's been incorporated into some of the other lots. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. I'm not sure what's meant by right of ways.
Well, I guess my question is that the red dotted line, if you drew that line straight down south, would that be the same line all the way down the street?
I can jump in here, Wayne, if it'll help. The city owns the right of way up to the interior part of, or where you can see the yellow box there and where it says 50 feet, that is city property. And that line, from what I can tell, extends between 13th and 14th Avenue. That is city property. The suggestion to reduce the size of the outline, you can see where the dashed red line is for the city to preserve options in the event a sidewalk would ever be placed in that area. So that area, a sidewalk could go in there between 13th and 14th Ave if the city wanted to, and the property owners who are using that would need to redo their landscaping in order to allow the city to, well, not allow, but so the sidewalk could be put in. If they wanted to pursue a similar avenue that the applicants are doing and purchase that, those would be separate applications that would go through the planning process and then come to the council. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. That clears it up. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Brian, to kind of go off Councilmember Dugan a little bit, I'm pretty sure that this was Dr. Kirk's old home, but all on the west side of H Street up until I say 11th Ave, there is no sidewalk. So it's not specifically trying to single out this area to say there's a connectivity. There isn't. There is no sidewalk from 14th Ave down to 11th Avenue. It's all on the east side where the sidewalk goes up H Street.
Right.
Mr. Chair.
Member Mono.
Thanks. I have a question. It feels a little bit messy for us to just vacate this one triangle spot that currently has because it currently has a fence. Why would we not continue the vacation all the way up to the north property line of this person's property so that it continues a straight line rather than having our public right of way sort of jog at the will of whatever the fences happen to be? It just feels like if we're going to vacate this, we should vacate it all the way along that east edge of the property line. And really, I think we should probably do it for the whole block face. So we're not just responding to sort of random, whatever a person may have put a fence in that encroached in the public right of way. It just seems like if we don't need this corner, we probably don't need any of that. I think we should keep the 6 feet personally for the potential to add a sidewalk. But if we're not going to keep that 11 feet, then it seems like we should just not keep that 11 feet the entire way. But why is this applicant only requesting that one section?
Well, the applicant actually has to pay for it. So that might be part of the issue. So they're requesting the portion of property that they have been using and are interested in purchasing that section. So if it increased, then the cost would also increase.
And the other property owners along that block face have not requested to purchase theirs. This is the only one I'm aware of that has a fence that is out over the city property, and the fencing area is being used as part of the applicant's backyard. So that's the main concern. They had a no-cost lease. I believe it was for a 10-year period to use this area. And then when it came up for renewal, that's when the city ordinance changed and is now requiring the city to charge for exclusive use of city property. The options are to enter into another lease with the applicants, and that would be for 10 years, and I believe, and then it could continue on. Rather than do that, the applicants asked if they would be able to just purchase the land from the city and know their cost. It would be a one-time expense to them to purchase that and to move their fence in the 6 feet, and then they would own the property. If the city at some point decided to put in sidewalks along that block face, they would work with the individual property owners to move or change their landscaping so the city would have access to that area and potentially do a similar vacation outside of the sidewalk area if the other property owners were interested in doing that. But again, as my understanding is, this is the only one that's fenced off and is part of the applicant's backyard.
So Brian, that was going to be my follow-up question to you and Wayne. Is the only reason the city is pursuing this is because it is fenced off currently? Because I know that all the properties south of that, I don't think have fences on that side of the property.
Yeah, I think just to clarify that the city hasn't pursued this. This is a private application. And it used to be, as Brian mentioned, things were a lot different back in the day, where our property division would actually issue revocable permits, and there were basically no fee revocable permits. So we have a number of these throughout the city where folks have been able to enter into these revocable permits and fence off a portion of what is essentially city right of way. The real estate division changed their policy and now require a paid lease agreement to do that. And so we have been getting over the last quite a few years, these requests to vacate portions of the right of way. And it's because of, that change in policy where, rightly so, the city is requiring payment of the use of city property. So I just want to clarify that it's not a city initiated thing. This is a private application.
Thanks, Wayne. I was just wondering if it was the city that sparked them going in to apply for this vacation because of their lease running up. So that's what I intended by that. So if there aren't any other questions, I'd love to turn it over to the applicant to have them.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Wharton.
I would just add that if I'm remembering the other properties south of this property on that block, I don't know that there are a bunch of other obstacles on that block that would prevent us from putting in a sidewalk on that side. So I don't know that we're like losing much because with this fence, based on the I guess lack of feasibility of making a sidewalk there through the other properties as well. And there is a sidewalk on the other side.
Totally.
Yeah. So.
Yep. I think that the two homes below this, though, the landscaping does go all the way to the curb. So.
Yeah. Right. And they have like large trees there. And so I don't think, we'd have to do a lot to put a sidewalk in.
Yep.
And there wouldn't be a sidewalk for it to connect to on 13th Avenue. So the sidewalk would just run right into the street.
Yep. Okay. I agree with you, Chris. Councilmember Wharton. Let's go to the applicant.
Thank you to the council and everybody for listening to us. I'm Justin, and this is my wife, Jody Miller. We live at the property. There's a lot to try and respond to as I was listening to the conversation. What I'm not certain about, that 17 feet, if that runs all the way down to 11th, which I think it does, there are two other properties on H Street between our house and 11th that have fences all the way into the city property. That's going to be on the north side of 13th. I'm sorry, on the south side of 13th and H, And then additionally on the north side of 12th and H, both have the exact same problem. So if the 17 feet exists all the way down to 11th, then it's not just us. So for whatever that's worth. And then just to add a little more color to that description, when we bought this house, the fence was already there. And like the chairperson said, this is Dr. Kurt's old home. So the fence was already there. It was chain link. It was poorly maintained. All we decided to do was tear down the existing fence and build a new fence. And at that time, we elected to get the permit and the lease. And that's how this whole thing started, is we were tearing down one fence, putting up a new one, got the lease. And then at the end of the lease, we received the notice that said, hey, you can no longer do this without paying for it, et cetera, et cetera. So it sort of feels like we're being singled out. Obviously, we're not, but we did the right thing by getting the permit when the fence had been there for 30 plus years prior to us even owning the home, you know. So not that that's, you know, obviously there are things, that rules and regulations, but that's how it feels from our perspective.
I'll add to that the Millers first contacted me about this in 2018, and this has taken a really long time to get to this point, and lots of consideration of lots of different alternatives. And I think the Planning Commission is, was in unanimous agreement that this is the best way to resolve this.
Thank you, Councilmember Wharton. Any other questions? Any questions for the applicant? Okay, I see this scheduled for a public hearing on the 21st, which is today, and we'll hold the hearing to accept public comment on October 19th. So still a little bit out there, but we're on our way. How does that sound?
Thank you so much for listening or hearing our request, and we appreciate all the time.
Nope, we appreciate you. So we're going to move on to item number 4, which is zoning text amendments for off-street parking. It is currently 2:56, so we still have plenty of time on this. I'm going to turn the time over to Russell Weeks, who is our council senior advisor, but I also know that we have a bunch of individuals from the planning department. Eric Games, senior planner, Nick Norris, our planning director, Wayne Mills will join us again, who's the planning manager, Blake Thomas, our director of CAN, and our transportation division director, John Larson. So Russell, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is, today is sort of a stop and check with the council interim step to reaching a final conclusion on this off-street parking. The council members met in small groups in late August to discuss the items that are listed here, that are listed in the staff report and in the planning division staff report. Since then, 3 other items have been added to that list since those meetings. And the goal here, I think, is really to let the council review the issues, think about them, and then come back later for a straw poll. And that will ultimately lead to a formal ordinance for consideration. Eric has prepared a short presentation, and for purposes of the discussion, we probably ought to stick with the draft report that Eric prepared, so that everyone is dealing with the same issues as they arise. And I'll leave that the rest to Eric to start the conversation.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Russell. Good afternoon, council members. Apologize, this hasn't been fully updated. We weren't quite certain we were on this agenda, but I will go through this very briefly, and then Russell's asked me to take a look most specifically at the new items that have been added since the small group meetings were held. So next slide. So we've been through this numerous times, and what we're looking at, but again, we're talking about the off-street parking and specifically to update minimum and maximums, permitted alternatives, and then the design of parking lots. So next slide. So this just talks about some of the goals and the major overarching topics here. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but needless to say, we're trying to improve the experience in Salt Lake as a place for people, not cars. So next slide. So the key updates, of course, we've got this whole idea of these parking contexts, which is the idea that one use may not require the same parking in a certain area of the city as another. So there's the four context. And these are just some of the major topics, the major updates that we've done throughout the chapter that you can see there. Next slide. Which brings us to, after the number of briefings we've held, the small group meetings kind of says, okay, well, where are we today? There are 14 outstanding issues that have been identified. And they're on that draft document you have that we'll pull up in a second. And at the time of the small group meetings, it was 11. We've kind of come through, and I guess this is part of, just an ordinance being in the works for several years, and some just, these topics are, of course, are important and impact a lot of things. So the new items, maybe we can go to, do you have ability to pull up that draft document I've still sent across? Or if not, I can share my screen.
I think you're better off to share your screen.
Okay, let me do that. Give me 1 second. No, it's not letting me share content. It's an inactive button on my,
Eric, let me email Taylor really quick with that item.
Okay, it might. Hang on, it just became active. Let me know if that pulls up at all. Did that pull up?
Yes.
I see it.
Okay, so the 3 new items are highlighted here in yellow, and the ones kind of above the others is a little bit more of a discussion. So I am just going to highlight the 3 new items, and then I'll turn it back over to Russell to walk through the discussion on the remaining items, and he's also indicated those in his staff report. So the first, we did have some brief discussion on this item during the small group meetings, or at least identified that we saw as an issue. So basically there's a concern that the proposed parking minimums for storage and warehousing uses are too high. And so what happened, so this is showing what is in your proposal currently, this table is. And what happened is this is calculated in a little different manner than in the existing ordinance. Well, once we start running calculations and looking at it, there were cases in which it became almost 4 times as high as existing regulations. And that's just, we felt that's just far too high for these warehouse type uses that have a lot of automation. We're pushing other transportation and things like that. So in this table, I've just highlighted what's in your current proposal, and basically looking at some potential solutions. They could just go to all having no minimum parking for storage and warehousing type uses in all contexts. And the other is, we come up with some other minimum number, some fractions therein, or some other way to figure that and do that. Or it could, of course, be left as proposed. Planning staff looking at it feels that these type of uses largely regulate themselves. There's no reason for them to build excess parking. They're going to look at their specific use, how well it's automated, the size of their products, things like that, and they're going to plan parking accordingly. And so we would just suggest that that just go to no minimum for those type of uses. So Russell, I don't know if you want to talk about these and go through questions right now, or you just want me to show them, or what?
What's your pleasure, council members? Would you want to address each one of these individually?
I'm seeing nodding, yes, that they would like to.
Okay. So yeah, if there's any questions or comment on that, that'd be great to talk about those now.
So, council members, do you have any questions in regards to this first one?
I'm fine with staff's recommendation.
I'm sorry, what was that, Councilmember Mono?
I just said I'm fine with staff's recommendation in this case.
Okay.
Any chance Eric could make it a bit bigger?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So this is just what's existing. This 1 space per 1,000 square feet plus 1 space per fleet vehicle. With that 1 per 1,000 square feet at a minimum, when you're talking about a warehouse that has large projects or products or something like that, or has a lot of warehouse space, we're getting some that are 1 million square feet. I mean, you could end up with massive amounts of parking. And so again, this is just super high, and we've said it's got to be reduced. So we're proposing it just goes down to no minimum and let them self-regulate. That would be a comfortable, safe area to do that. And we're saying it could happen in all contexts that allow these type of uses.
Okay, Eric, looks like everyone's comfortable with that.
Do we need to straw poll this?
Council members, that's up to you. We had hoped, we intended this just to be a summary of issues, but if it's your call, if you want to straw poll it, that's fine.
So I don't see it necessary for us to straw poll it. I mean, if there are any reservations when we go through it, then we can discuss that, and we'll still take it to a vote as we go to the formal meetings. But I don't think that it's necessary for us unless it's we hear a bunch of comments and negative feedback.
Okay, great. So with that, maybe I'll move on to this next new item, and this is about congregate care facilities. And you'll recall that a number of months ago, there was it was adopted to change, and you can't make me say this word because I don't know how to pronounce it, miscegenary uses to congregate care. And so again, this is largely just a technicality that the transmittal you had showed miscegenary uses, and it needs to be changed to congregate care facilities. Now, in that congregate care facility definition that was adopted, these parking minimums right here and parking requirements were what was presented and adopted. I suppose the only question here is if it's appropriate in the new context layout. And previously, LA masonry uses had no minimums in the transit context. We've kept that the same, but just this is straight up as was proposed in that text amendment of 1 space for each family plus 1 space for every 4 individual bedrooms, plus 1 space for every 2 support staff present during the busiest shift, and that's for a large facility. And for a small facility, 3 spaces per facility and 1 space for every 2 support staff during the busiest shift. So unless there are conversation on maybe that's no longer appropriate, or there should be some other minimum for one of the other contexts, this would just be a technicality.
Council members, and feel free to speak up because I can't see all of your tiles if you have any comments with this. And if we don't have any comments, we'll just move on, Eric, to the next one.
Sorry, Vice Chair Rogers, I have one question for Eric about, I mean, I think it's fine. It's a +1 space for every 2 support staff present during the busiest shifts. Like, do we need to be that specific about the time? And because then we're gonna have to go enforce, and you know, it's just, to me, it's
Right. Yeah.
that
And that's clearly, you know, that would be really hard to enforce exactly off of that. Maybe that's just to give them a heads up. And how are we going to know when they submit that? Absolutely, it could be simplified. This is a copy and paste from what was adopted with the the previous text amendment. So that is something that could be wordsmithed differently.
okay. Yeah, that would be great. I think, yeah, you said it.
I-
Thanks.
We will work on cleaning this up because you're right. That's an unenforceable regulation. There's no way we would know that, and it changes over time. So we'll find a different way to deal with that.
Okay. So the last one that's new is just with the special exceptions, and this just has to do with, of course, you know, you're going to be talking about special exceptions next. And frankly, it just depends which one is passed first. If the parking ordinance passes first, then there's no change needed. If special exceptions changes first, we have one minor modification. Currently, it just references, they both have the same standard of how to treat 2 parking related modifications, one for front yard parking and one for storage of vehicles without a hard surface. Just currently, the language you have in front of you points them to the special exception process, which may be going away. So this is just, if that happens first, we need to clean up a tiny bit of language there. There's no other changes to the standards. So that's it. And that's all the new items. So everything else, either you've seen in small group meetings or Russell's report.
Eric, could I prevail on you to since your draft is up on the screen, could you walk us through this thing? And the only thing that I have to say really is that the way this list is set up is degree of difficulty. The further down the list you go, the easier the decision should be. That's about it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, let's do that. So the first concern is was originally brought up by Council Member Mono, and it's for parking lots under 10,000 square feet. There's a concern that small lots between 5 and 10,000 square feet along certain corridors would have a difficult time providing parking if redeveloped. So we already have a provision that small lots under 5,000 square feet for commercial or multifamily don't have to provide parking, but it was brought up that maybe up to 10,000 would be more appropriate. And so there was a couple potential solutions on this one. One that was originally presented was that maybe lots between 5 and 10,000 square feet provide 50% of required parking. There was the recommendation of maybe there's just no minimum parking for lots under 10,000 square feet. Or there was also discussion on, rather than tying it to lot square footage, to tie it to a certain building size. And I don't know that we came up with a certain size for the square feet of building, but that would obviously be a little bit more consistent with our other regulations of looking at the size of a use. And then also considered was just leaving it as proposed and rely on reductions that are already found in the ordinance for shared parking or location near transit or things like that. This one, frankly, it was the only one that has 4 potential solutions. All of them were kind of discussed. A number were interested in each one. So Any questions on that one or discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a question. In the earlier part of the staff report, or I think it's the council staff portion of the staff report, it looks like we have some reports of what the small group discussions came out of. And the one, Nick Norris, I think this is the one that I was in, but I don't remember, had said something about 500 square feet of building. Nick, is that something you still think would be a good solution? And can you explain that a little bit better? Like the first 5,000 square feet is exempt, and then.
So first off is, this would be the only regulation in the parking chapter that's based off the lot size. So it's a whole new way to, it's a one-off thing, and it exempts basically, if you were to change that to 10,000 square feet, it basically exempts almost every residential lot in the city from ever having to provide parking. Not that, I mean, from a planning perspective, that's the best practice we're starting to see around the world, really, but that's a significant change in Salt Lake City. And so I think it's better because all of our regulations are based off building size. We're from how you administer the code and read the code and apply the code, it's better to base it off of the size of the building, because on a 10,000 square foot, we have some lots down, like in our downtown, where a 10,000 square foot lot may have 100,000 square feet of building space on it. And so there's some unintended consequences that happen when you base it off of a lot size. Whereas if you go into some of our other zones, you may only have a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot building there, and there's not really the same type of impact. And it's probably okay in places where we have transit and everything else, but in the areas of our city that are more suburban in nature, that could be a pretty significant impact. So I think when it comes to this, I would prefer the regulation to focus on the size of the building versus the size of the lot. The size of the lot, I mean, you can do it, but I would guess that close to 50% of the lots in Salt Lake City are less than 10,000 square feet, regardless of the underlying zone. And so it has some pretty far-reaching impacts if you were to increase that. When it's at 5,000, it's not as impactful.
I will share. So the way it's currently written, it is only for commercial or multifamily lots. Just to be clear on that, and that obviously could be brought in that way. But that's how it's written. But Nick's right on the size of those lots.
Right, and the hard part is when we talk about commercial, are we talking about commercial zoning districts? Or just commercial uses? What if it's not a commercial use, but it's not a residential use either? And so some of the language is not consistent with some of the terms that we use throughout our code, which makes it harder to administer and apply the code. So I think whichever route is taken, we probably need to clean up the wording in this section so that it's more clear on how it applies and where it applies.
Well, I'd be supportive of moving that direction and not tying anything to the lot size if that cleans up the ordinance further. I'm not sure what square footage of building, like is it the first 5,000 square feet, the first 2,500 square feet? I think that would be something I'd look to your technical expertise too, but that does seem like it'd be cleaner and a little bit more simple.
Yeah, what we would do is we would probably have to look at some of our typical buildings in the city. We can't obviously analyze every single property that this might apply to decide what kind of size of building is on there, but we can look at some buildings that are similar in scope and around whatever that 5,000 or 10,000 is and get an idea of what it might mean for those types of uses and buildings of that size.
Well, given what Nick just said, I think that would be my first choice, and my second choice would be to just leave it as proposed, because I do understand that concern of a building where we allow a lot of density to be really tall and have a lot of square footage with no parking. So I guess that's where I'm at.
So, Mr. Chair, my question would be, Nick, how long could we vote on this ordinance and then come back to this one specific one and to change that verbiage, or you could turn this pretty quickly to bring it back into this whole package?
Well, it depends on how far down the path we go, right? If we're switching it from building or from lot to building, and we're keeping it at 5,000 square feet, then we only really need to look at a handful of examples of properties that have that size of building on it to see, get an idea of what the council can expect, what the community can expect with that kind of a provision. If we have to go deeper than that, it probably would require more work. And if that were the case, I would suggest leaving it as is, and then we could do it as a separate type of thing. But you know, it's every time we do that, it means it's one new project that is in the queue that's preventing us from doing other city initiated projects that might be more impactful or more important, or help the city achieve bigger goals, or something like that. So I think I would prefer to be able to take a look at it and do a little bit of research before, so we have an understanding of what that might entail and whether or not we think we can do it quickly and easily, or if it's something that's going to require more time.
Okay, so, but you mentioned lots under 5, not lots under 10. So you would want to make it lots under 5.
Well, no, my preference is to change the lot to the building size, because I think the building size, that's how all of our other parking regulations are.
Right.
So understanding what that means is we want to provide the council with some data that would help you make a decision regarding that. And if we can't do that, then it's, you know, if it's a simple regulation where it's just lots under 5, then I would suggest we keep it the same, because that's going to minimize that impact outside of those transit contexts and things like that already. So we'll just have to see when we do some initial research, what the results are before we go decide if we need to go down and do more of an analysis of that.
Okay, so from my perspective, then I would encourage us to go down that route and look at the different possible additional proposals of the lot and building sizes, and then come back to us.
Okay. Any other conversation on that one?
I don't think so.
All right, so the next is about the concern of insufficient parking for multifamily developments in the central 9th area. So this one, there was quite a bit of discussion, just because there's currently not a very good mix of land uses. People aren't able to do kind of those activities of daily living, but it's got some of the best transit in the entire city. And so just looking at that, there was a number of, well, basically there was just 2 solutions that kind of came from it. One, some wanted to include some parking requirements for studio or 1-bedroom units in the transit context. Another just wanted to leave it as proposed, saying that there's going to be growing pains, but that eventually it'll even out, and people will be able to use the transit that much more, or developers, as land is kind of eaten up, developers will put in appropriate amounts of parking in their projects. So I don't know how much more we want to get into that one.
Any questions for this one? How about that, Eric? No questions.
Okay, sounds good. So the next one had to do with parking adjustments, which were in your proposal are capped at 40%. So basically, there's 25% parking reductions for multifamily dwellings that include affordable or senior housing, and then an additional 15% when located within a quarter mile of high-frequency bus routes. So the idea was just, is that enough of a reduction? And maybe should senior affordable housing be granted even additional reductions? And so you can see what was proposed right here, kind of the baseline, and then the 40% reductions above that. But there was some conversation of just to leave it as proposed, that was enough of a reduction when combined with everything else. There was also talk of allowing those 40% reductions to be stacked on any other allowed reductions. And so there's a little bit of discrepancy here between Russell's staff report and what I've got written here. This combined 80% is showing the 25 and the 15 plus 40% reductions that can be granted anywhere else through other parking alternatives elsewhere in the code. So I guess there's some question whether it would be the 80% combined reductions or 65%, by subtracting this 15% here. But staff's recommendation was to allow up to those 80% reductions for senior and affordable housing. Conversation on that one?
Doesn't look like it, Eric. You're doing great, man. Keep it up.
All right, we'll keep rolling. They're gonna get easier. So the next was in the ballpark area, specifically when you look at this map. Basically, the concern is that the underlying zoning doesn't really match what is envisioned for the area, and so the zoning is lagging. That would leave the ballpark, the entire ballpark area in the general context, which is our most permissive zone, parking. So it allows for the most parking. And so in order to combat that and at least apart and line it up a little bit more with what's envisioned, it was proposed to take this area striped in purple, the South State Street Corridor overlay, and actually include it in the neighborhood center context, so that parking minimums and things like that would generally go down, and the parking would be a little bit more in line with what's envisioned for the future development there. And that kind of provides kind of a stopgap until the zoning kind of catches up.
Mr. Chair, I just came up with just thought of a question that would be a concern in this. So that I know that there are a couple parcels in the South State Street Corridor overlay zone that are not corridor commercial, that like for instance I just blanked on the name of that weird restaurant that we rezoned. What was it called? The one on 13th and State Street, Coachman's. We that one, I think we zoned something that would be less parking than the neighborhood center context. So in this case, which is it, the underlying zone that would prevail or the overlay that would prevail?
Generally, the overlays say that they prevail the underlying zoning districts. So one of the, if the idea is that in this case, we don't want that, we'd have to add some sort of qualifier that in the parking chapter that says, if a property's in the SSC overlay, but the underlying zoning district is in a different context, and the underlying zoning district, if it's lesser, will override or apply, or it's something where you just let the applicant pick.
Yeah, the applicant can just choose whether neighborhood context or the zone, the context based on the underlying zone. I think we need to include something like that. personally.
Yeah, because we also have like, State Street has a number of different zones. So it's not just universal. So we've got BP zone down by 2100 South, and I think there's some residential zone mixed into that overlay. So it's kind of a mixed bag of goods there. So.
Yeah. And obviously it would still go off the use, because the context is just the first level of deciding what the parking counts are, and then it goes down to the use. And so frankly, actually, when you get down to it, looking at a specific use, it might all be even across the board. You know, you have to see how that would shake out for any given use, because sometimes a use has the same parking requirements in neighborhood center as it does in urban center or transit or general or something like that. So sometimes it might not be an issue at all, but overall, planning staff was comfortable with the recommendation to put the overlay in the neighborhood center context. Any other questions on that one? No. Okay, we already talked about this one at the beginning. The next was bike parking, and basically the concern was that proposed minimum required bike parking was too low, specifically for commercial and industrial uses. And so this was originally brought up by the administration, and then planning office and public mirrored those comments. And so this is what was currently proposed in your ordinance, was for commercial uses 1 per 20,000, and then there was no minimum requirement for industrial uses in any of the context. We thought that was just too low, didn't reflect other goals that were being looked at. So we proposed commercial uses go down to 1 per 10,000, and then industrial uses, you know, they've got plenty of space to provide bike parking, and that supports the bike lanes and everything else that's being put in towards those type of uses. So this is just substantially higher, and that's what administration and staff recommended, and it seemed to be pretty, in the small group discussions, everyone seemed to agree with that. Any questions on that one? Okay. Loading berths. Again, this is the idea that a multifamily residential development needs to provide an area for people moving in, moving out, repair trucks, plumbers, things like that. And so this was the proposed threshold that you have in your ordinance in front of you, the number of dwelling units, and then how many berths they need to provide. And I'm sorry, this is, yeah, so this was just way too high. Administration brought this up, and the development community as well, and our office looked at it. So those numbers could be changed in any direction. Administration and staff recommendation was just to one, increase the initial threshold up to 80 units, and then have a bigger gap, 80 to 200 units, just provide one short berth. Greater than 200 units, just one additional short, when we even struck out the per 200 units. And that's just takes up less room that could be otherwise devoted to other units or other type of uses, and we just thought that was appropriate. So any other questions on that one?
Doesn't look like it, Eric.
All right. The next was looking at parking maximums for restaurant uses in the neighborhood center context. This was raised by the planning office. In your ordinance, you have a proposal for a maximum of 7 stalls per 1,000 square feet for restaurant uses. Universally, when we went through the proposed changes, the consultant we were working with recognized, and we've recognized, that our parking maximums for restaurants were just too low. And so they were proposed to be increased. But as we looked at it, and kind of looked at some real world scenarios, felt that that 7 spaces per 1,000 really could change the character in some of the neighborhood centers if a lot of too much parking was provided. And so we've recommended that that be reduced from 7 stalls per 1,000 to 5 stalls per 1,000 in the neighborhood center context. And that seems to bring things a little bit more in line and still help avoid some of the, because there is dilemma in the neighborhood center context for parking to spill out into the neighborhoods, and that's a constant complaint we get. But that felt that the 5 per 1,000 was a little bit better balance just for the neighborhood center context. So it'd move up with this transit and urban center context standard. So comment on that one. Nope. Hey. ADA parking, there was some question in the early briefings about ADA parking that small parking lots would not be providing sufficient ADA compliant parking stalls. And basically we looked at that, contacted the ADA department and just made sure we were consistent with all national ADA standards. And that's that parking lots with 4 or fewer parking spaces are not required to identify an accessible parking space, but they do have to meet the dimensional standards. They still have to have at least one that meets the dimensional standards, and that is for van ADA standards. And so that's just consistent with national standards, like I mentioned. And so we're proposing just to leave it as is and be consistent with the nationwide standards. So any questions on that? The next was concern raised by the City Council and the development community about the effective date of any of these changes. And the idea is that there are some properties that are going to be pretty substantially impacted. And so if these changes go into effect, there's some that will have been very far into the design process. They'll go to submit an application and they could be caught off guard with changes that they didn't anticipate. So the proposal or potential solutions are, just leave it as, like anything else, as soon as it's adopted, it becomes effective. The other is to allow a certain time frame in which applicants can follow one or the other. And our attorney's office has indicated that that's doable. We're proposing that to be a 4-month period. There's not a specific reason for that, other than that kind of is about the time frame that if we don't know about something in 4 months, they are probably not too far along the design process, and we don't want to drag it out forever. So if they had a complete application submitted, maybe they'd be locked in on one or the other, and then after the 4 months, they just need to follow the new. So that's what we're recommending. Any conversation on that one? No? Okay, and again, we'd have to wordsmith that one specifically with the attorney's office and that, and see how it would all logistically work, but everyone seemed to be in agreement it could work. Okay, the next is about multifamily parking maximums, and there's just a concern that they may be too high, especially in the transit and urban center context. So if you look right here in yellow, that shows what they're proposed at, and we admit those are high. They're a little lower than some other, transit-rich cities that we've looked at. But basically, as we've looked at this, we feel that the higher land prices near transit would ensure that, people were not providing that. And we've kind of got that comment from the development community that they never want to provide more parking. It costs them a lot of money. It eats away at their bottom line. And so we felt comfortable leaving that just as is, and let the cost of the land kind of naturally dictate that. Alternatively, there could be maximum set in any one of the contexts. So comments or questions on that one? Okay. This social club definition, that's just a technicality. It's not, that definition has been striked from land uses and has been replaced by a myriad of other breweries and things like that. And so we just need to get rid of that definition. Everything else is taken care of. That's just a technicality. And I think our last two congregate care facilities we talked about at the beginning, and special exception language we talked about at the beginning. So if there's no other questions, that is all of the items, and it's 3:40 on the dot.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you being extremely thorough. Council members, any more questions for this?
Just to double check, Mr. Chair, I saw, my notes indicate there are only two outstanding items. And one is the whether to go to building size instead of lot size. And the other one was to add language that would allow a developer to choose between an overlay zone and the underlying zoning. Is that the way you all see it?
What was
members?
See that again, Russell?
Well, the two issues that I heard that remain to be done. One is the determination, the little study on whether switching from lot size to building size on the smaller lots. That's something planning wants to do before they forward a recommendation. And the other one would be to add language that would in the ballpark area zoning that would add language that would allow developers to choose between underlying zoning or the overlay zoning in terms of parking.
That's what
And Russell, I'll even say on the second item, the wordsmithing. I mean, when we when we get any updated ordinance language, that would just be taken care of in there. But
okay.
I kind of see it more as just this study on switching to building size.
If it's a wordsmithing issue, then that's fine. That's great.
Yeah, I believe that's it.
Mr. Chair, you're muted if you're.
Jennifer, I was just saying, if it's a wordsmithing issue, let's make sure that that gets to Russell so he can look it over and make sure that that's taken care of before we go on to approving this or voting on it. I know that I want to thank the planning department for this. It's been a long time coming. I think the first briefing we had was Tuesday, February 16th, with a follow-up in April, and then the one today. So I know it's been back and forth, and just want to make sure that this ordinance is prepared the way that the council sees it so that we can get it passed. So if you wouldn't mind following through with that, Eric, that would be greatly appreciated, working with Russell.
Sure. Yep, no problem.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, can I ask a quick question? I just want to make sure that we fully understand what our task is moving forward. But it sounds like we are going to be making the changes based on the recommendation in the document that Eric went through and send an updated ordinance to the council based on that, and that we don't need to wait for straw polls on things. Is that correct?
That's how I'm looking at it, unless any council members want to argue it differently. I just didn't want to go through straw polls unless, there were a bunch of negative comments and I didn't get a single one, so.
Perfect, we'll proceed, thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and please thank your team, whoever wasn't able to attend today, and let them know we appreciate all their hard work on it.
Yep, will do, thank you.
We're going to move on to item number 5, which is a text amendment eliminating the special exception process from the zoning ordinance follow-up. We have Nick Norris from our planning director, who's here as well as Blake Thomas, the CAN director, and from our council office policy analyst, Nick Tarbett. So Mr. Tarbett, I'm gonna turn it over to you to catch us up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned, this is a proposal. I'll just give the quick background since we had a briefing in July on this and a public hearing on August 17th. This is the proposal to remove the special exception process from the zoning ordinance. At that public hearing, a few different groups spoke. There was 2 constituents who expressed concerns about the impact these changes may have on their properties next to businesses that have outdoor dining. And then Verizon Wireless also submitted some comments. The council asked the planning staff to go back, review those concerns, and come back with some potential options for the council to consider that may help address the concerns the residents raised. Also, Verizon submitted their comments in a track change format, which are included in your packets. The attorney's office and planning staff looked at them. They don't oppose what Verizon Wireless included. So if the council is supportive of including those in the final draft, we can do that. So with that recap, I'll turn the time over to Nick Norris so that he can step through the options that were outlined in the planning division memo.
Yeah, can I share my screen?
Yep, we just need to have Taylor give you that permission. So Taylor, can you work on that?
Yeah, you should have it now.
Perfect. Okay, I wanted to walk through, okay, hopefully, can you guys see that share?
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to walk through what the current code allows, and we've already gone over these issues, Nick did, but what the current code process is for outdoor dining and what the proposal does, because I do think that there's some confusion in that. So current regulations, let me move this screen so you guys can fully see this. Right now, outdoor dining in every zone that allows a restaurant or that has a non-complying restaurant, so a zone that doesn't currently allow restaurants but had one in a location and it's continuing ever since. Outdoor dining is allowed by right in that buildable area. That buildable area is basically the area that's remaining on a lot where you can build a building after you apply the required setbacks and landscape buffers. So there's only 5 zoning districts that require a special exception. So again, the image on the right is actually the site that some residents have complained about, particularly the noise. And so that green vertical line is approximately where that 10-foot side yard setback would be. And then on the right side is that setback. The left side is the buildable area. So technically, in that buildable area right now and legally, they can operate outdoor dining without a special exception. The special exception is only for situations where they want to encroach into a required yard. So that includes the front yard, the side yards, a corner side yard, and the rear yard. And right now it is, so outdoor dining in general in the buildable area, it's a permitted use if the restaurant is permitted. It's conditional if the restaurant is conditional. What the proposal does, here's the current regulation, sorry, for the outdoor dining where you can see where it's permitted on the left side of that bar, and permitted if approved has a special exception on the right-hand side. And this is a CN zone property. So there's 5 zones, like I said, the residential business, the RB, which is primarily located along 1100 East, the RMU 35 and the RMU 45, which is in East Downtown. There's a few in the avenues and it's scattered around the city, but it's generally not a big block of properties that are zoned that. And then the CN and the MU. The CN is the zone that is the most integrated into our neighborhoods. So if you think about, 900 West corridor, most of those business districts are CN and CN or CB. So 9th and, or not 9th and 9th, but 15th and 15th, the 17th and 17th East, 1300 South, 21st, and 20, well, that's CB2. So we just don't have that much CN. Some of it's on 2100 South, but it's really scattered. And that's tends to be the location where outdoor dining has the most interaction with residential uses. Right now, the code does not require a special exception outside of those. It allows it within the required yards in every other zoning district that allows restaurants. One oddity about our code is that because this gets back to what we were talking about with that last item, because it says in commercial and manufacturing districts, it leaves out a bunch of different districts where restaurants are also allowed. So the proposed regulations keeps things allowed in the buildable area. That stays as is. It does allow it in a required front, that says side yard, but it should say corner side yard setback. And now with this proposal, it would actually prohibit it from being within 10 feet of a side or rear property line. So the other thing is the rear yard varies quite a bit. If those 5 districts, the side yard is all 10 feet or less. And so this is actually at least matches or increases the restriction. But in the rear yards, where the required setback is usually a percentage of the total lot depth, it would allow outdoor dining to encroach closer than what the current setback is, but still require that 10-foot setback. So again, same image, left side where it would be permitted, right side it would no longer be permitted. Obviously, if somebody is in a non-complying situation where they had that approved prior or that zone allowed it prior, they would be allowed to operate without having to be required to bring their property up into compliance. There's a couple of other things that change in here. Is that the 10-foot setback applies to all zones when next to residential, even if the zone has a smaller setback. So we have something like 20 in that memo. I think there was like 20 something different zoning districts that have at least one property that allows a restaurant and is adjacent to a residential zone. So outside of those 5, so in those other 17 or so zoning districts, they could build right up to the property line because that zone doesn't have a minimum setback. And so this actually increases that protection and reduces the impacts in those situations. We are also changing the regulation for live or amplified music. So, and this is one that we probably need to tweak a little bit because we actually have had some people in the downtown area say that those hours don't really work for them, and it may be appropriate for the downtown area to have different hours than a restaurant in say 15th and 15th. But right now the code relies on live or amplified music exceeding the health department's regulations and creating a nuisance. This actually puts a prohibition on it between the hours of 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. We probably want to add a caveat there that says when adjacent to a residential zone so that we're reducing those impacts. And then if there's approval through a conditional use plan development or some other land use approval that happened in the past, those would still apply as well. And then we also, one thing that we didn't do that the council did maybe 6 or 7 years ago now is clarify non-conforming restaurants to make sure that they're treated the same as the other restaurants. So in the memo we provided, we basically thought there were 5 options, and the council can do anything within these options. You can prohibit outdoor dining within a certain distance. You can increase the landscape buffer. Some of these situations, for example, in the CN zone, the landscape buffer is only 7 feet in depth, even though the setback is 10 feet. You could require that full 10 feet to be landscaped. That doesn't necessarily minimize the noise. It does soften the noise, and so it changes how it's perceived. You can increase the setback for outdoor dining, which would still allow it on bigger properties, and it would restrict it on smaller properties. And it also starts to further to impact the buildable area somewhat, meaning you could still expand a restaurant or build a restaurant in that space. You just couldn't do the outdoor portion of it there. The council could consider it being a conditional use when in the side or rear yard in a residential zoning district. That would at least provide some sort of avenue to analyze the impacts and give the planning commission the authority and the ability to make some site-specific requirements to reduce the impacts. Obviously, there's a cost to that, a time, staff resources need to go towards that as well in processing it. Or you can limit the size of the outdoor dining area in a side or rear yard. And generally that would be something like a maximum square footage. So I went over the things to consider already in this presentation. Couple other things, the utility boxes, I don't have the language in here, but basically it clarifies that telecommunication ground mounted boxes are also included as a utility for the purpose of this, of that portion of the section. And then one other thing that has come up because of the timing of a couple of different moving pieces. I left the parking out of this because Eric covered that in the previous item. But we also have a special exception that's kind of buried in the code for child daycare centers when they're in residential zoning districts or in residential uses. So buildings, not just districts. And so with this going away, this would essentially make it so that there's no home daycares. And so we are working on a proposal to update our daycare requirements with the goal of expanding where daycares can go in the city so that we are a more livable city and more supportive of those people who need that service. But for the interim, we would probably recommend that this be changed, that language be changed from special exception to a conditional use. And then there's a series of standards in this section that all relate to, that would relate as well. There's a few references to special exceptions in there that would also come out. And that's it.
Questions for Nick?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Romano.
Thanks. Sorry, I know I've asked a lot of questions today. I committed to a couple constituents that I would ask a question, and I think that this is actually a policy question for the whole council. The way, in my conversations with, I think the two constituents that have been speaking the most loudly about the outdoor dining special exceptions are both in my district, and so had conversations and read through lots of emails, and the way that I'm understanding it is that their concerns, the only way to really reduce their concerns or to mitigate their concerns would be to not allow outdoor dining adjacent to residential zoning districts at all, even within the buildable envelope. And so I think that the policy question that leads me to is, are the benefits of outdoor dining both to local businesses and in terms of those businesses becoming like neighborhood gathering spaces? I think the benefits exist to the local business and to the neighborhood as a whole for having outdoor dining allowed in these zones, but it sort of comes on the back of negative impacts to one specific resident. So do we weigh the benefits to the broader neighborhood and to the business above the impacts to the immediately adjacent resident, or do we protect the immediately adjacent resident at the expense of the local businesses and the broader neighborhood context? And that's a discussion that I guess I'd open up to the council to see where people are at. But to me, all of the things that Nick Norris, and thank you for doing that, Nick, I think of all those things, those possible suggestions, none of them actually mitigate the concerns of my constituents. So it's, do we disallow it altogether to mitigate those concerns, or do we just realize that that's an unfortunate trade-off?
Nick, just to follow up, I guess, and it probably is to Councilmember Romano's point, how many restaurants are currently affected by this? I mean, I know that some of them want to do outdoor dining, but I mean, if they already know the ordinance, they know what they're zoned in and how they're, next to residential neighborhoods. I mean, if we don't do anything, it's not going to affect their current business since they're already knowing what the current ordinance is, right?
So, yeah, so an existing restaurant is, provided everything on the property is legally existing, they went through the proper permits and processes, and their outdoor dining is totally legal, they're not impacted by this ordinance, except for some of the operational things, like the music, things like that, because that happens on that day that it occurs. And if it's a violation on that day, then that regulation applies. So the use stuff is good, but the kind of operational types of things are what would kick in. But yeah, we can apply a zoning regulation retroactively. So if there's legally existing outdoor dining, they have a right to continue that until that outdoor dining ceases to exist.
So my follow-up question is, I'm all in favor of making it more a gathering spot and that type of thing, but what about looking at a conditional use for those I know we just started looking at that, we just did the heights for fences and stuff. What about looking at, increasing that for that condition if there is outdoor dining and being able to protect somebody's privacy? I know, most people purchase their homes because they like the way where they live, right? And they want to be able to continue to enjoy that use of their property. And I'm afraid this is going to impact that, currently with people who have purchased their homes in these areas, knowing those things. How would we be able to help negate those impacts of outdoor dining in their backyard?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, I mean, can we look
Okay.
at saying, or Nick, can we look at saying, yeah, we'll allow them to increase the height of their fence, to do that?
Yeah, so what the benefit of the conditional use process is, because it is detrimental impact based. If someone can reasonably demonstrate that there's a high likelihood that there's a reasonable impact, then the planning commission can consider ways to mitigate that. And if they can't be mitigated, then the planning commission does have the authority to deny something, a conditional use. The hard part about it is that under state code and based on previous case law, mitigation means just reduce. It does not mean eliminate. And so that's where it's challenging. And in many cases, those impacts can be mitigated simply by requiring a certain type of fence at a certain height or a certain amount of landscaping along that fence, because that would reduce it. It wouldn't eliminate it, but it would reduce it to the point that it becomes what is considered an acceptable level of impact, which means it's basically the same impact as if it were a permitted use.
My concern still is for those individuals that purchase their homes and then having this change and have them be impacted. So that's something that's going to weigh on me. And then I don't know if that's fair to say that, does the future, does that outweigh what they're currently doing? I don't think that's fair. I think that's kind of Big Brother overseeing and overstepping what they're currently, looking at doing for their own home. So that's just where I'm at and what I'm going to have to weigh out and looking at when we come to vote. Council members, any other questions for Mr. Norris? Thanks again, Nick, for being here and taking our questions, discussing this.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry, do we have a few more minutes before we go? We'd like to just nail down some of the specifics, if you would be okay with that.
Sure.
I think one of them then is the music in the downtown zones, when it's allowed. Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like the 9 to 9 may be difficult for some of the downtown businesses. So if the council would be interested in changing that time frame.
So the idea behind that would be that you would change that restriction would apply when you're either next to a residential zone or within a certain distance of a residential zone. Meaning, if you're on, 400 South, if you're a restaurant on 400 South and 300 East, you may be far away. And if you have a rooftop patio or something, it may be perfectly okay for you to have music and without many impacts. Whereas if you are out in 15th and 15th, or we can use the properties in question that some of the neighbors have complained about, or some of the neighbors in the avenues that have complained about it, they would have different requirements because of the proximity of the residential uses.
Yeah, I remember when we did this, Nick, 6 or 7 years ago, because of the Third Ave restaurant right next to Wayne's Barbershop, that we looked at doing this. So that's a concern for me too. So council members, are you looking at changing that, or are you okay with the 9 to 9? Councilmember Valdemoros.
I think I'm okay with a 9 to 9 change, just because downtown will increasingly be more residential, than potentially commercial, and so as we have all this multi-family housing coming online, it can be a nuisance for the neighbors. I live very close to the Tabernacle, which is no longer there, but it did have an impact when people were, loud music was there until 1 in the morning, and sometimes past it with the folks congregating outside. So I did receive complaints, and I also experienced it. But again, I chose to live downtown. I've always tried to live downtown Salt Lake City. I know what I'm getting myself into, but I can see how it could be impactful to a lot of people. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Valdemoros. I saw Councilmember Ferris's mic ready to go too. No.
I would be
Dugan.
I would be concerned about noise ordinance in downtown in the city stopping at 9 o'clock at night. So maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that seems to be awfully early to put a noise ordinance in for a downtown area for anything outside.
Next to a residential?
Well, because that's the hard part about a downtown. The residential is at the apartment building or a single family home. And, downtown is going to have a lot of people there, but you are living downtown. The reason why you're living downtown is because you're close to a lot of amenities. And one of the issues about amenities is it's going to be a little bit louder. You just have louder traffic. You go to any big city, it's loud at night. And to stop having an ordinance at 9 o'clock at night, when a lot of times that's when people start to congregate downtown, I can see that being difficult. And I've been in a lot of cities, and some places that's when it gets noisy, but you also know that because you're living downtown. You're not in a single family home in a residential area.
Councilmember Ferris is ready. Go for it.
I completely agree with Councilmember Dugan. I think the key to a vibrant economy in the downtown area is having that nightlife as well. We've often complained about how half of Salt Lake City disappears after business hours, and the only way to offset that and gain the tax base that we need to maintain our city to the level that we wish is to expand those business hours, and it has to go past 9 o'clock. I think that's just way too early.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Where does this 9 to 9 number came from, Nick or Nix, whoever would like to answer that?
So it's something that has sometimes been applied as a condition for outdoor dining through past planning commission approvals. And that's based on almost always near residential uses. And so it's when we were crafting these regulations, we relied heavily on the actions that the planning commission has taken over the past, really for decades, on outdoor dining, and that was a common provision. And so when we wrote it, we really were focused on the neighborhoods. And then just recently, it was brought to our attention that impacts everything from bars in industrial areas to bars downtown to downtown restaurants, and things like that. And so it made us say, wait a minute, that's right. that's probably a little overly restrictive because, agreeing with what the council member said earlier was, when people are making a choice to live downtown, they're choosing everything that comes with living downtown. And, it's just, it is different than if you're in a neighborhood that has a corner restaurant, and that's about the extent of your commercial activities.
So Nick, what would that extend to? Last call?
I don't know. I think we'd have to look. I think it's important to note the health department noise regulations would still apply. We've had just to be blunt, we've had a hard time relying on health department to enforce our noise ordinance. Just like everybody else, they have a limited amount of resources and time and things like that. And when these things are violations, tend to be when most people aren't working. And so it creates an issue, but yeah, that would still apply. And I don't know that necessarily if we would just rely on what the noise ordinance says as far as noise, or if we would apply some standard there. And I just don't know. I mean, most restaurants or bars at least tend to, once they can no longer start selling alcohol, they tend to wind things down anyway to try to clear people out within the hour before they close. So I think we just have to we'd have to do a little bit more research to figure that out. But my hunch is that we'd rely on what the noise ordinance says.
Okay. Yes, Councilmember Dugan.
I have to ask a naive question. So do we already have a boundary that says this is the downtown area?
So we would do it based off of zoning district. So basically, okay, it wouldn't just be downtown. It would have, so the 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. restriction would apply more than likely if you're within a certain radius of a residential zoning district. So that gives it accounts for other situations as well, but that radius, that distance, maybe a couple hundred feet, but that gives the noise a chance to be absorbed by all the other buildings and trees and background noise, and so it's less of an impact.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
No, the question, the thought that I'm having is, like I said earlier, if we residential areas will continue growing downtown. So at some point, if we're that restrictive, then we want, a lot of restaurants and a lot of bars, etc., might not be able to, operate. And then we're what Councilmember Ferris said. Then we wanted a vibrant downtown, but now all of a sudden, too close to residential, and they're not allowed. So I'm in the middle. Like I don't know yet what will be best. So
unless I hear anything other, let's I don't want to say kick it to Nick Norris, but let's have him come back with a suggestion of timing for the downtown area, and we can look at changing that. I'm comfortable with the residential neighborhoods like we discussed, 9 to 9, but I think the council members are right. We need to look at extending that for the downtown area. So we hear light rail, one of the biggest complaints is over by the gateway, and there's over there, the Dakota Lofts, there are people living there, and that's a really loud area for that exchange for light rail. So.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I'll just add that I'm also in favor of going later. So just to help inform the discussion and to have Nick come back, both Nicks. Thanks.
Great. Nick, Tarbett, anything else on there besides that?
Just two quick items. With the daycare, are you okay with what Nick proposed putting in there?
I personally was. I'm looking to other council members. They're all nodding yes. Not all of them, but I think we're pretty comfortable on that.
Okay. And then the final one is the Verizon wireless edits, if the council is okay with that.
I don't see any not agreeing, so I think we're comfortable moving forward with that as well.
Okay. Then we'll
Great.
leave you. Well, thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. So,
Thank you.
yeah. We are going to move on to a couple of board appointments. Board appointment number 6 is the Police Civilian Review Board with Chuck Kravanik. Chuck, let's hear why you want to serve on the Police Civilian Review Board. And welcome. Thanks for coming earlier too and accommodating us for our schedule today.
Sure, no problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay. I've been interested in quite a while, for quite a while, in the Police Civilian Review Board. And it really is just wanting to be involved in the community and knowing what goes on. I actually, a year or two ago, I participated in the Citizens Police Academy because I found it fascinating. A lot of the conflict that was kind of happening between police and the community, and I just wanted to educate myself and learn more about it. And from that experience, I really learned a lot of what a difficult job it is, but what an important job it is. And so that led me to, instead of protesting in the streets, I just found this was a way to serve the community in a productive way. So I applied quite a while ago.
Well, you know, government, it never goes fast. So
Yeah.
you just saw a couple of things that we heard. We were almost at a year at a couple of them. So appreciate
Certainly.
you being willing to stick through it. You know, it's an important board and it's changed over the years and it's, you know, you have a huge impact now. So we appreciate you, Chuck. Are there any questions for Chuck? You're going to be on the consent agenda tonight. You don't have to tune in. It sounds like everybody's in favor of your appointment. We just want you to know we appreciate your willingness to serve again and serve Salt Lake City specifically as you serve on the Police Civilian Review Board. You can see that the council is looking at and has made some significant changes to the police department and are always looking for ways to be more progressive and be more advanced in training and throughout the police department. So we've got a great police chief and have police officers coming back on board, which we're grateful for, and this council is willing and committed to making sure that it's properly funded. So thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.
We have one more board appointment this evening or this afternoon. It's the City and County Building Conservancy and Use Committee with Kathy Davis. And I know Kathy was here earlier, so I just want to thank her again for joining us earlier and accommodating our schedule. We've got a closed session after this and just want to thank you, Kathy, and tell us why you want to serve on this great board and preserve and protect that great building that Councilmember Valdemoros is sitting in.
Well, I'm actually on the Salt Lake City Arts Council board, and it's required that a member of the Salt Lake City Arts Council be on the board of the City and County Building Conservation and Use Committee. So I volunteered to be that person. The board, the Arts Council board, uses Washington Square quite a bit for some of its events like Living Traditions, and so I'd like to be involved in some of that. I'm also a history major many years ago, when I was in college, and I used to live in a home that was built in 1928. I have a great affinity for older homes, but so I know a lot of what goes into updating things, and I'd just like to be involved with the city and county building.
Well, thanks, Kathy. Appreciate that little background. You know, I love the city and county building with all the great art that we've got there. So it's neat to hear you're coming on from a different board as well. So to have that kind of legalized. So.
Well, and actually, to date myself, I was involved in the campaign to preserve the city and county building those many years ago.
Well, thank you. It's just made full circle, Kathy. Way to go. So appreciate your willingness to serve. And like I said to Chuck, you're on the consent agenda this evening and no need to tune in. We've had a full agenda this evening, but you're on that consent agenda for approval. We appreciate you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yep. Let's see, we've got some informational updates, council member, that are tentative, but we're going to move on to that. So we've got report of the chair and vice chair. My heart goes out to Amy right now. You know, she's been a great support for the council and leader, and just want her to know that we're all thinking about her and throwing our love to her. Looking for item number 11, the report and announcements from the executive director. Cindy Gus Jensen.
I don't have anything.
Well, that's kind of spectacular then, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, well, there is a closed session scheduled for advice of counsel and deployment of security personnel. Friendly reminder to everyone to be sure that they are in a closed area in a room by themselves during the closed session. So I'll look for a motion for us to go into that closed session.
So moved. Does that work?
I'm sure it does. I'll check with the attorney just
Second.
to make sure.
I think we have to state the reason. So,
I did.
Oh,
I
you
stated
did.
them.
Oh,
Yeah.
then second.
I had a motion by Councilmember Valdemoros and a second by Dan Dugan. Sorry, Chris Wharton, but you'll be the third. How about that?
That's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna straw poll this, so I'm gonna go with Councilmember Wharton first.
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris.
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yes.
Councilmember Mono.
Yes.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So we're gonna leave this meeting and go into a separate link that it was sent to you for the closed session, and I will see you there.
And anyone let us know if you haven't received that link. Just send me a text.
Thanks, Jen.